The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their vote, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. It should be the same for primaries too, but primaries kind of weren't a thing at the time. They didn't become a thing for... Gosh, I'm not actually sure when primaries really started becoming a thing. But for this point, the assumption was that everybody knew who was going to be running anyway. Congress can set the law of what day everyone votes and when the electors are chosen.
I don't think it's we're talking about this, but you mentioned the primaries. I think a lot of people have more problems with the electors of primaries than a lot of people have than they do with the electors of the actual election, because primaries are really weird.
Primaries are really weird, and a lot of states still do caucuses, which I have feelings about. And let's see, when was the first primary election in the United States? So first it was congressional caucuses, and then it became national nomination conventions. But the first primary started in about the 1900s. The progressives started running the primary system, but the political bosses were still picking everything. Basically, the current system dates from 1952, when Harry S. Truman lost the New Hampshire primary and dropped out of the race. But the convention chose Adlai Stevenson, who didn't run in any of the primaries.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think a lot of people have a problem with it. Was like I think it was like the I think it was 2016 or 2020. I didn't vote in the primary 2020 because COVID, and I couldn't get to the
right.
And I forgot to do the mail-in thing, but I think in 2016, I voted for Sanders in the primary, but apparently, we saw I heard a news article that the party that wanted him to be the president candidate, so they put all their power towards the other people, like Hillary.
I mean, Bernie Sanders has never been a member of the Democratic Party, so I have a hard time blaming them. I do feel that the party has too much power. That being said, they can't force people to run, and they can't force people to vote. I'm not sure a single person I knew who said in 2016 that they would vote for Elizabeth Warren voted for Elizabeth Warren. Like, there's only so much they can do, and sexism is still a major factor in U.S. politics, and I have a lot of feelings on the subject. But the primary system, as we know it, really only started coming into existence in the 1960s. If people want to know what an undemocratic system of choosing their candidates looks like, that's still in living memory.
Yeah, I heard about the was it the 68 primary ride or something like that?
Yeah, the convention in Chicago in 68, yeah. Because a lot of people did not feel that their voices were being heard, because their voices weren't being heard. Especially because a lot of the people who really had strong feelings were old enough to be drafted, but not old enough to vote. At this stage, voting is still, even in 1968, voting in presidential elections was still 21 and older, but the draft was 18 and older. And those were a crucial 3 years, and the parties were not listening to people in those 3 years. They don't now, but that's because people of that age don't vote, not because they can't vote. So, but Taft, I know, was one of those smoke-filled room candidates. Theodore Roosevelt was chosen as the vice presidential nominee by the New York State political party to get him out from underfoot.
Yes, I heard about that. It's like, let's make him vice president, get him out of the way.
Yeah.
That worked out well for them.
I was reading about Garfield years ago. I read a joint biography of Garfield and Guiteau. And I forget how many ballots were taken behind closed doors, because the conventions being open the way they are is also a very new development. So in 1880, when Garfield was nominated and became president, the public had no say in who the nominee was going to be. And there were a lot of people who were considerably more popular than Garfield was, who didn't have enough sway in the halls of power to get the job. It's a whole big complicated thing, and Guiteau himself had aside from being almost certainly mentally ill, had very strong feelings about the different factions of the party. And it's stuff that we don't even think about in terms of those days, because I don't think most people stop to consider how the nominees were chosen.
Yeah, Garfield was okay, but I always preferred Heathcliff more than Garfield.
Yeah, well, Heathcliff has gone some bonkers directions in recent years. My son actually used to go to Garfield Elementary in Olympia, and the school secretary had a bunch of stuffed Garfields and things on her desk, and at one point I just finally stopped and told Zane a whole bunch of stuff about the actual historical President John A. Garfield, because I think he was really cool and worth remembering. And I've long said, after reading that book, I became convinced that Garfield would be the first former U.S. president to be glad to know that a future U.S. president was black. I think from Lincoln on, you get ones who are pretty sure it'll probably happen at some point. Garfield would have been actually happy to know about it. The U.S. would have been very, very different if Guiteau had not shot him, or if the doctors had been competent.
And maybe someday we'll actually have a woman president.
Yeah, well, I'm not holding my breath.
Hey, if we can be racist in the election, maybe someday we can be unsexist in the election.
I don't think that race didn't factor into the most recent election, but yeah.
Okay, also, isn't at least tell the day, it says they choose the day.
They will choose the day.
But is it like set in like a more?
It's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The election is not on the 1st because the 1st would have been the day that merchants tallied their books. A lot of important stuff still happens on the 1st. but they wanted it to be early in the month, and they didn't want it to be on a Monday because first day of the week, same thing. So first Tuesday after the first Monday. So the earliest election day can be is November 2nd.
So at this time, they haven't chosen it officially yet. They could be any day.
Yeah,